Order! Order! Before we come to the statement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I would like to point out that a British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings. Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, let me start directly with the issue most worrying the British people today, the cost of energy. People will have seen the horrors of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. They will have heard reports that their already expensive energy bills could reach as high as £6,500 next year. Mr. Speaker, we were never going to let this happen. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has acted with great speed to announce one of the most significant interventions the British state has ever made. People need to know that help is coming, and help is indeed coming. We're taking 3 steps to support families and businesses with the cost of energy. Firstly, to help households, the energy price guarantee will limit the unit price that consumers pay for electricity and gas. This means that for the next 2 years, the typical annual household bill will be £2,500. For a typical household, that is a saving of at least £1,000 a year based on current prices. We are continuing our existing plans to give all households £400 off bills this winter. So taken together, Mr. Speaker, we are cutting everyone's energy bills by an expected £1,000, and millions of the most vulnerable households will receive additional payments, taking their total savings this year to £2,200. Secondly, as well as helping people, we need to support the businesses who employ them. The Energy Bill Relief Scheme will reduce wholesale gas and electricity prices for all UK businesses, charities and the public sector, such as schools and hospitals. This will provide a price guarantee equivalent to the one provided for households for all businesses across the country. Thirdly, energy prices are extremely volatile, rising and falling erratically every hour. This creates real risks to energy firms who are otherwise viable businesses. Those firms help supply the essential energy needed by households and businesses. So to support the market, we are announcing the Energy Markets Financing Scheme. Delivered with the Bank of England, this scheme will provide a 100% guarantee for commercial banks to offer emergency liquidity to energy traders. Mr. Speaker, the consensus amongst independent forecasters is that the government's energy plan will reduce peak inflation by around 5 percentage points. It will reduce the cost of servicing index-linked government debt and lower wider cost of living pressures. And it will help millions of people and businesses right across the country with the cost of energy. Let no one doubt, Mr. Speaker, that during the worst energy crisis in generations, this government is on the side of the British people. The Bank of England are taking further steps to control inflation, acting again only yesterday. And I can assure the House that this government considers the Bank of England's independence to be sacrosanct. And we remain closely coordinated with the Governor and myself, speaking twice a week. But, Mr. Speaker, high energy costs are not the only challenge confronting this country. Growth is not as high as it should be. This has made it harder to pay for public services, requiring taxes to rise. In turn, higher taxes on capital, higher taxes on labour have lowered returns on investment and work, reducing economic incentives and hampering growth still further. This cycle has led to the tax burden being forecast to reach the highest levels since the late 1940s, before even Her late Majesty acceded to the throne. We are determined, Mr. Speaker, to break that cycle. We need a new approach for a new era, focused on growth. Our aim over the medium term is to reach a trend rate of growth of 2.5%. And our plan, Mr. Speaker, is to expand the supply side of the economy through tax incentives and reform. That is how we will deliver higher wages, greater opportunities, and crucially, Mr. Speaker, fund public services now and into the future. That is how we will compete successfully with dynamic economies around the world. And that is how, Mr. Speaker, we will turn this vicious cycle of stagnation into a virtuous cycle of growth. So, as a government, we will focus on growth, even where that means taking difficult decisions. Now, none of this is going to happen overnight, but today we are publishing our growth plan. Today we are publishing our growth plan that sets out a new approach for this new era, built around three central priorities: reforming the supply side of the economy, maintaining a responsible approach to public finance, and cutting taxes to boost growth. Mr. Speaker, the UK today has the second lowest debt-to-GDP ratio of any G7 country. In due course, we will publish a medium-term fiscal plan setting out our responsible fiscal approach more fully, including how we plan to reduce debt as a percentage of GDP over the medium term. And the OBR, Mr. Speaker, will publish a full economic and fiscal forecast before the end of the year, with a second to follow in the new year. Fiscal responsibility remains essential for economic confidence, and it is a path we are committed to. Today we are publishing costings of all the measures the government has taken, and those costings will be incorporated into the OBR's forecast in the usual way. The House should note that the estimated costs of our energy plans are particularly uncertain, given volatile energy prices, but based on recent prices, the total cost of the energy package for the 6 months from October is expected to be around £60 billion. We expect the cost to come down as we negotiate new long-term energy contracts with suppliers. And in the context of a global energy crisis, Mr. Speaker, it is entirely appropriate for the government to use our borrowing powers to fund temporary measures in order to support families and businesses. That's exactly what we did during the COVID-19 pandemic. A sizable intervention was right then, and it is right now. The price, the heavy price of inaction, would have been far greater than the cost of these schemes. Mr. Speaker, we are at the beginning of a new era, and as we contemplate, that's right, a new era, and as we contemplate this new era, we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there is huge potential in our country. We have unbounded entrepreneurial drive. We have highly skilled people. We have immense global presence in sectors like finance, like life sciences, technology, and clean energy. But, Mr. Speaker, there are too many barriers for enterprise. We need a new approach to break them down, and that means reforming the supply side of our economy. Over the coming weeks, my Cabinet colleagues will update the House on every aspect of our ambitious agenda. Those updates will cover the planning system, business regulations, childcare, immigration, agricultural productivity, and digital infrastructure. But, Mr. Speaker, we start this work today. An essential foundation of growth is infrastructure. The roads, railways, and networks that carry people, goods, and information all over our country. Today, our planning system for major infrastructure is too slow and fragmented. The time it takes to get consent for nationally significant projects is getting slower, not quicker, while, Mr. Speaker, our international competitors forge ahead. We have to end this. We can announce that in the coming months, we will bring forward a new bill to unpick the complex patchwork of planning restrictions and EU-derived laws that constrain our growth. We will streamline a whole host of assessments, of appraisals, of consultations, endless duplications and regulations. We will also review the government's business case process to speed up decision-making. And today, we are publishing a list of infrastructure projects that will be prioritised for acceleration in sectors like transport, energy and telecoms. And to increase housing supply and enable forthcoming planning reforms, we will also increase the disposal of surplus government land to build new homes. Mr. Speaker, we are getting out of the way to get Britain building. One of the proudest achievements of our Conservative government is that unemployment is at the lowest level for nearly 50 years. But with more vacancies than unemployed people to fill them, we need to encourage people to join the labour market. We will make work pay by reducing people's benefits if they don't fulfil their job search commitments. We will provide extra support for unemployed over 50s and will ask around 120,000 more people on universal credit to take active steps to seek more and better paid work or face having their benefits reduced. Mr. Speaker, at such a critical time for our economy, it is simply unacceptable. It is simply unacceptable that strike action is disrupting so many lives. Other European countries have minimum service levels to stop militant trade unions closing down transport networks during strikes. So we will do the same, and we will go further. We will legislate to require unions to put payoff negotiations have genuinely broken down. And of course, Mr. Speaker, to drive growth, we need new sources of capital investment. To this end, I can announce that we will accelerate reforms to the pension charge cap so that it will no longer apply to well-designed performance fees. This will unlock pension fund investments into UK assets and innovative high-growth businesses. It will benefit, Mr. Speaker, savers and increase growth. And we will provide up to £500 million to support new innovative funds and attract billions of additional pounds into UK science and technology scale-ups. Now, Mr. Speaker, this brings me to the cap on bankers' bonuses. A strong UK economy has always depended on a strong financial services sector. We need global banks to create jobs here, invest here, and pay taxes here in London, not in Paris, not in Frankfurt, and not in New York. All the bonus cap did was to push up the basic salaries of bankers or drive activity outside Europe. It never capped total remuneration. So let's not sit here and pretend otherwise. It didn't cap total remuneration. So as a consequence of this, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get rid of it. And to reaffirm, we're going to get rid of it. And to reaffirm, the UK's status as the world's financial services centre, I will set out an ambitious package of regulatory reforms later in the autumn. But, Mr. Speaker, to support growth right across the country, we need to go further with targeted action in local areas. So today, I can announce the creation of new investment zones. We will liberalise planning rules in specified agreed sites, releasing land and accelerating development. And, Mr. Speaker, we will cut taxes. For businesses in designated tax sites for 10 years, there will be accelerated tax reliefs for structures and buildings and 100% tax relief on qualifying investments in plants and machinery. On purchases of land and buildings for commercial or new residential development, there will be no stamp duty to pay whatsoever. On newly occupied business premises, there will be no business rates to pay whatsoever. And if a business hires a new employee in the tax site, then on the first £50,000 they earn, the employer will pay no national insurance whatsoever. That is an unprecedented set of tax incentives for business, Mr. Speaker, to invest, to build, and to create jobs right across the country. I can confirm to the House that we're in early discussions with nearly 40 places like Tees Valley, the West Midlands, Norfolk, and the West of England to establish investment zones. And we'll work with the developed administrations and local partners to make sure that Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland will also benefit if they are willing to do so. If we really want to level up, Mr. Speaker, we have to unleash the power of the private sector. And now, Mr. Speaker, we come to tax, central to solving the riddle of growth. The tax system is not simply about raising revenue for public services, vitally important though that is. Tax determines the incentives across our whole economy. And we believe that high taxes reduce incentives to work, they deter investment, and they hinder enterprise. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said, we will review the tax system to make it simpler, more dynamic, and fairer for families, and we're taking that first step today. Mr. Speaker, the interests of businesses are not separate from the interests of individuals and families. In fact, it is businesses that employ most people in this country. It is businesses that invest in the products and services we rely on. Every additional tax on business is ultimately passed through to families through higher prices, lower pay, or lower returns on savings. So I can therefore confirm that next year's planned increase in corporation tax tax rate will not rise to 25%. It will remain at 19%, and we will have the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G20. This will plough almost £19 billion a year back into the economy. That's £19 billion for businesses to reinvest, create jobs, raise wages, or pay the dividends that support our pensions. I've already taken steps elsewhere in this statement to support financial services, so the bank surcharge will remain at 8%. But, Mr. Speaker, we will do more to encourage private investment. The annual investment allowance, which gives 100% tax relief on investments in plant and machinery, will not fall to £200,000 as planned. It will remain at £1 million, and it will do so permanently. Our duty, Mr. Speaker, is to make the UK one of the most competitive economies in the world. And we are delivering. We will deliver on this. Mr. Speaker, we want this country to be an entrepreneurial, share-owning democracy. The Enterprise Investment Scheme, the Venture Capital Trust, we will extend beyond 2025. The Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, company share option plans, we will increase the limits to make them more generous. Crucial steps on the road to making this a nation of entrepreneurs. For the tax system to favour growth, Mr. Speaker, it needs to be much simpler. I'm hugely grateful to the Office of Tax Simplification for everything they have achieved since 2010. But instead of a single arm's-length body which is separate from the Treasury and HMRC, we need to embed tax simplification into the heart of government. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I have decided to wind down the Office of Tax Simplification and mandated every one of my tax officials to focus on simplifying our tax code. To achieve a simpler system, I will start by removing unnecessary costs for business. Firstly, we will automatically sunset EU regulations by December 2023, requiring departments to review, replace or repeal retained EU law. This will reduce burdens on business, improve growth and restore the primacy of UK legislation. Mr. Speaker, we can also simplify the IR35 rules, and we will. In practice, reforms to off-payroll working have added unnecessary complexity and cost for many businesses. So, as promised by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, we will repeal the 2017 and 2021 reforms. Of course, we will continue to keep compliance closely under review. Mr. Speaker, Britain welcomes millions of tourists every year, and I want our high streets and airports, our ports and our shopping centres to feel the economic benefit. So we have decided to introduce VAT-free shopping for overseas visitors. We will replace the old paper-based system with a modern digital one, and this will be in place as soon as possible. This is a priority for our great British retailers, so it is our priority too. Our drive to modernise also extends to alcohol duties. I have listened to industry concerns about the ongoing reforms. I will therefore introduce an 18-month transitional measure for wine duty, I will also extend draft relief to cover smaller kegs of 20 litres and above to help smaller breweries. And at this difficult time, we are not going to let alcohol duty rates rise in line with RPI. So I can announce that the planned increases in the duty rates for beer, for cider, for wine, and for spirits will all be cancelled. Now, Mr. Speaker, we come to the question of personal taxation. It is an important principle that people should keep more of the money they earn. And it is good policy, Mr. Speaker, to boost the incentives for work and enterprise. Yesterday, we introduced a bill that means the health and social care levy will not begin next year. It will be cancelled. The increase in employer national insurance contributions and dividends tax will be cancelled. And the interim increase in the national insurance rate brought in for this tax year will also be cancelled. And this cut will take effect from the earliest possible moment, November the 6th. Reversing the levy delivers a tax cut for 28 million people, Mr. Speaker, worth on average £330 every year. A tax cut for nearly 1 million businesses, and I can confirm the additional funding for the NHS and social care services will be maintained at the same level. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I have another measure. Today's statement is about growth. Home ownership is the most common route for people to own an asset, giving them a stake in the success of our economy and society. So to support growth, increase confidence and help families aspiring to own their own home, I can announce that we are cutting stamp duty. In the current system, there is no stamp duty to pay on the first £125,000 of a property's value. We are doubling that to £250,000. First-time buyers currently pay no stamp duty on the first £300,000. We're increasing that threshold as well to £425,000. And we're going to increase the value of the property on which first-time buyers can claim relief from £500,000 to £625,000. The steps we've taken today mean that 200,000 more people will be taken out of paying stamp duty altogether. This is a permanent cut, Mr. Speaker, to stamp duty effective from today. I have another measure, Mr. Speaker. I have another measure. High tax rates damage Britain's competitiveness. They reduce the incentive to work, to invest and to start a business. And the higher the tax, the more ways people seek to avoid them, or work elsewhere, or simply work less, rather than putting their time and effort to more creative and productive ends. Take the additional rate of income tax. At 45%, it is currently higher than the headline top rate in G7 countries like the US and Italy. And it is even higher than social democracies like Norway. But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether. From April the 23rd, we will have a single higher rate of income tax of 40%. This will simplify the tax system and make Britain more competitive. It will reward enterprise and work. It will incentivize growth. It will benefit the whole economy and the whole country. And Mr. Speaker, after all, this only returns us to the top rate we had for 20 years, including the entire time the opposition was last in power. Bar 1 month. And that's not all. I can announce today that we will cut the basic rate of income tax to 19 pence in April 2023, 1 year early. That means a tax cut for over 31 million people in just a few months' time. This means that we will have one of the most competitive and pro-growth income tax systems in the world. Mr. Speaker, for too long in this country, we've indulged in a fight over redistribution. Now we need to focus on growth, not just how we tax and spend. We won't apologise for managing the economy in a way that increases prosperity and living standards. Our entire focus is on making Britain more globally competitive, not losing out to our competitors abroad. The Prime Minister promised that we would be a tax-cutting government. Today, we have cut stamp duty, we have allowed businesses to keep more of their own money to invest, to innovate and to grow. We have cut income tax and national insurance for millions of workers. We are securing our place in a fiercely competitive global economy with lower rates of corporation tax and lower rates of personal tax. We promised to prioritise growth, Mr. Speaker. We promised a new approach for a new era. We promised to release the enormous potential of this country. Our growth plan has delivered all those promises and more, Mr. Speaker, and I commend it to the House.
Order, order. Before I call the Shadow Chancellor, I inform the Honourable and Right Honourable members that at the end of questions on the statement, I will call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move a provisional collection of taxes motion. Copies of the motion are being made available in the vote office. I now call the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his place. Can I thank the Chancellor on his comprehensive demolition of the record of the last 12 years. Their record, their failure, their vicious circle of stagnation. The Chancellor has confirmed that the costs of the energy price cap will be funded by borrowing, leaving the eye-watering windfall profits of the energy giants untaxed. The oil and gas producers will be toasting the Chancellor in the boardrooms as we speak, while working people are left to pick up the bill. Borrowing higher than it needs to be, just as interest rates rise. And yet the Chancellor refuses to allow independent economic forecasts to be published, which would show the impact of this borrowing on our public finances, on growth and on inflation. It is a budget without figures, a menu without prices. Speaker, what has the Chancellor got to hide? This statement is an admission of 12 years of economic failure. And now here we are, one last claim that these ministers are chopping and changing, all the chaos and confusion. There has been one person there throughout, the Prime Minister. She's been a minister for a decade and defended every single economic decision. So when the Prime Minister says she wants to break free from the past, what she really means to say is that she wants to break free from her own failed record. Because where have the last 12 years left us? Lower growth, lower investment, lower productivity, and today we learn that we have the lowest consumer confidence since records began. The only things that are going up are inflation, interest rates and bankers' bonuses. And borrowing. As the Tories become more and more detached from reality, millions of people, millions of our constituents, are lying awake at night, worried about how they're going to make ends meet. Labour won the argument that action on energy bills was necessary. But the question is, who pays? The energy producers who have profited so much from the rises in prices should make a contribution. But when the country asked who should fit the bill for their energy rescue package, the Conservatives responded, you, the British people. Instead of standing up for working people, the Conservatives chose to shield the gigantic windfall profits of the energy giants, leaving tens of billions of pounds on the table and pushing all of the costs onto government borrowing, to be paid for by current and future taxpayers. The Prime Minister and Chancellor have no regard for taxpayers' interests or for the concerns of working people. It's not just the Conservative Party is not working for ordinary families, it is actively working against them. Mr. Speaker, we have had 6 so-called plans for growth from the Conservatives since 2010. Here they are, Mr. Speaker, a litany of failure, every single one of them. Now, I do at least commend the Chancellor on having the ambition of achieving 2.5% growth a year, the last Labour government's rate of economic growth. But to achieve that sort of growth, and for that sort of growth to be sustainable, you need a credible plan. And the truth is that this government does not have one. The Prime Minister and Chancellor are like two desperate gamblers in a casino chasing a losing run. The argument peddled by the Chancellor today isn't a great new idea or a game changer, as the Minister said, as much as he'd like us to think so. What this plan adds up to is to keep corporation tax where it is today and take national insurance contributions back to where they were in March. Some new plan. And it's all based on an outdated ideology that says if we simply reward those who are already wealthy, the whole of society will benefit. They've decided to replace levelling up with trickle down. As President Biden said this week, he is sick and tired of trickle-down economics. And he is right to be. It is discredited, it is inadequate, and it will not unleash the wave of investment that we need. Mr. Speaker, it is not just those on this side of the House who have these concerns. The Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath described the Prime Minister's economic plans as taking a holiday from reality. The Right Honourable Member for Richmond, that was 2 Chancellors ago, was perhaps too honest with his party. He said, "We have tried having a low corporation tax as a means of getting business to invest, but that it has not worked." Now, the new Chancellor and the new Prime Minister used to agree with that. Indeed, they voted for it. Labour supported it too. Members opposite might have changed their minds, but we have not. Because the evidence shows that low rates of corporation tax are not the best way to boost investment and productivity. And the Tories' own record shows that. Britain has the lowest headline rate of corporation tax in the G7, but we also have the lowest rate of business investment in the G7. That's why Labour would do what businesses are actually asking for, using targeted investment allowances to boost productivity and growth, and scrapping outdated and unfair business rates that harm our high streets and small businesses, replacing them with a system that's fit for the 21st century. And what about their other policies? Let's take the so-called investment zones. Again, these are nothing new. Every time they were tried, all they have achieved was moving growth around the country, not creating it. The best way out of the high-tax, low-growth spiral that the Conservatives have created is to get the economy firing on all cylinders in all parts of the country. It's going to take much more than a stamp duty cut to get our country back on track, and home ownership back to the levels last seen under a Labour government. Now, these stamp duty changes have been tried before. Last time the government did it, a third of the people who benefited were buying a second home, a third home, or a buy-to-let property. Is that really the best use of taxpayers' money when borrowing and debt are already so high? And can the Chancellor confirm today how much of this stamp duty cut will go to those purchasing multiple properties? Instead of stamp duties going up and down like a yo-yo, we need to get building. We need to target support at first-time buyers and tackle the issue of homes being sold to overseas investors. The Chancellor has made clear who his priorities are today. Not a plan for growth, a plan to reward the already wealthy, a return to the trickle-down of the past, back to the future, not a brave new era. The Chancellor and Prime Minister proclaimed in Britannia Unchained that the British are amongst the worst idlers in the world. And to prove that they mean it, instead of supporting working people, this government is cutting their rights at work. Working people are the backbone of Britain and they should be respected, not sneered at. Labour will always stand up for their rights. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has in effect today admitted he has broken his own fiscal rules. This is now the 10th time that the Tories have broken their own fiscal rules, something I'm sure that the Office for Budget Responsibility would have confirmed if they had been allowed to publish their forecasts today. Mr. Speaker, it is unprecedented to have a fiscal statement of this scale with no independent forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Never has a government borrowed so much and explained so little. Economic institutions matter, yet this government has undermined the Bank of England, sacked the respected Permanent Secretary at the Treasury and silenced the Office for Budget Responsibility. This is no way to build confidence. This is no way to build economic growth. Mr. Speaker, Labour believes in wealth creation. We will always support enterprise, creativity and hard work. We want British business to grow, to be successful and to contribute to our country's prosperity. What we don't believe, as the Chancellor and Prime Minister do, is that British workers are idlers. We understand that it is the workers who turn up every day to make a great product at a factory or deliver a great service in the store who generate growth. It is the teachers giving the young people the skills they need, the doctors and nurses keeping people well, the entrepreneur taking a personal risk to start a new business. These are the people who generate growth and they all deserve to share in it too. Mr. Speaker, this statement is more than a clash of policies. It is a clash of ideas. Two different ideas about how our country prospers. If you are a pensioner worried about the cost of living, a working family see your mortgage rate going up, a small business whose costs are spiralling, the government's announcements today do little to reassure them. Bigger bonuses for bankers, huge profits for energy giants, shamelessly shielded by Downing Street, and all the while, ministers pile the crushing weight of all of these costs onto the backs of taxpayers. The value of sterling has fallen. We can see it, half his colleagues suspect it, and financial markets know it. The verdict is clear. When it comes to the economy, this Tory leadership do not know what they are doing. The Conservatives cannot solve the cost of living crisis. The Conservatives are the cost of living crisis, and our country cannot afford them anymore.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very interested to hear the Right Honourable Lady's defence, and I was very curiously affected when she said that Labour believes in wealth creation. That was the biggest fancy I've ever heard. You cannot grow, Mr. Speaker, the economy if you keep taxing families. You cannot grow the economy. You cannot grow the economy if you see business as the enemy. We have to reiterate very clearly to our friends on the opposite benches that you cannot tax your way to prosperity. You cannot help workers by increasing their taxes. And far from denigrating British workers, what our measures have done, is they are relieving burdens on our workers and our people by intervening on energy prices and also relieving the burden of taxation. We've got to unshackle the creative energies of this country, and that's what we're 100% focused on doing.
Committee Melstride.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome much in this statement. There is a great deal that will help millions of families and businesses up and down the country, but there is a vast void at the centre of the announcements that have been made this morning, and that is the lack of an independent OBR forecast. And at a time, Mr. Speaker, when the markets are getting twitchy about government bonds, when the currency is under pressure, now is the time for transparency and making it very clear that whatever tax cuts or otherwise there may be, they are done in a fiscally responsible manner. And I have to say to my right honourable friend that he should have come forward with an OBR forecast, and that we know as a committee, because of our correspondence with Richard Hughes, the head of the OBR, that the OBR was standing ready to come forward with just such a forecast. And we further know, because of that correspondence, that there is a forecast, a baseline forecast, that the Chancellor has at the moment and would have been on his desk when he first arrived in office. So could I now gently and respectfully ask him to release that forecast, to provide transparency to the House, to provide a calmness to the markets, and to do it without any further delay?
Thank you. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, and I'd also like to gently and respectfully remind him that in the statement I committed in a very categorical way to the OBR coming up with a forecast before the end of the calendar year. It will be a full forecast, it won't be a baseline forecast, and it will fully score the measures outlined in this growth plan. And I'd be very happy to meet him in his committee at a time which is convenient.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor comes here today, the 6th Chancellor in 7 years, asking us to believe that the things that he voted fine at the time, but need completely reversed now. A new era, but they've been in government for 12 years. He stretches credibility beyond breaking point, saying that tax cuts for the rich, whopping bonuses for the bankers and low corporation tax for companies will somehow refloat, magically, Britain's sinking economy. He has no evidence, and this is no plan for growth. It is budget measures with no OBR assessment, ducking scrutiny time and time again. It is a plan, Mr. Speaker, for recession, for debt on an unsustainable trajectory and almost inevitable public sector cuts to come. Actively choosing to permanently cut taxes and spend eye-watering sums to patch up a failed energy market while inflation soars, interest rates are hiked and recession looms will not create growth, it will create economic chaos. Nothing he has said today will provide any reassurance and give hope to ordinary people, folks struggling to get by in broken Britain. Families unable to put food on the table and heat their homes, punished by the Tory benefit cap and the two-child limit. These policies are driving up child poverty, and the Chancellor should be scrapping them, not the banker's bonus cap. Indebted households already struggling to pay their mortgages in debt. A stamp duty cut is not going to help, it's going to overheat that housing market even more. Mr. Speaker, disabled people and carers are terrified the electricity will run out. Pensioners are scared to turn on the heating. The energy price cap should not go up. It's already too high, and people must get more help now. Asylum seekers and people stuck on no recourse to public funds are forced to get by on a pittance, and there was nothing whatsoever for them from this Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, community organisations like Glasgow Central Mosque face additional energy bills of hundreds of thousands of pounds, which as a charity they just cannot afford. People depend on community organisations like the mosque, and they are being asked to be on the front line this winter. Even with the 6-month reprieve in energy prices, these bills will not go away. Would the Chancellor have the mosque close their elderly daycare service, or the counselling provision, the mother and toddler group, the poverty reduction work, or the vaccination centre that's been running in the community hall? These are very real choices communities are already having to make. The businesses I've been listening to over the past months are incredibly worried for the future. They were already facing severe pressure through supply chain costs, input costs, labour costs, COVID debts and Brexit woes before energy prices soared. Now they don't know how they will survive. 6 months will go by in a flash, and the question remains, what then? What then from the Chancellor? Companies can't wish away these bills. The eye-wateringly unaffordable contracts they are being forced to sign right now. What happens to those businesses who just miss the arbitrary cut-off? And what of the increase in standing charges, which we already know are disproportionately high in Scotland? Mr. Speaker, Scotland is an energy-rich country, but we don't have the power. Scotland's renewable sector is booming, but in off-gas grid rural Scotland, surrounded by the wind turbines generating clean green energy, people are having to spend an absolute fortune in heating oil. In Argyll and Bute, in Angus, the Highlands and Islands and across our rural communities, household fees increases of over 230% in the past 2 years alone. The UK Government's offer of £100 is nothing short of an insult as people turn to credit cards to fill up their fuel tanks. The Scottish Government is doing all in its power to support people through this crisis, strengthening the safety net by increasing the Scottish Child payment to £25 a week, doubling the Fuel Insecurity Fund to £20 million and freezing rents, because renters are also facing pressures. We have the highest rate of the real living wage in Scotland. We've invested in tackling fuel poverty and energy efficiency, but we could do so much more with more budget and more powers. At the back of the Blue Book today, still no carbon capture and storage for the north east of Scotland, a game changer for renewables in Scotland. Where is that in the Chancellor's plans? Nowhere again. We could have growth by investing in skills, in net zero and productivity. The Chancellor's plans will not do this. Mr. Speaker, people don't freeze to death in our Nordic neighbours, and people there are not living in one of the most unequal countries in the world, and it's only getting worse. This right-wing, Thatcher cosplaying shambles of a government is making choices that they will never feel the consequences of. Mr. Speaker, I beg of this Chancellor to listen to those on the edge, those who are desperately looking right now to him for a lifeline, but no one should have to beg for a decent standard of living. The people of Scotland see a Scottish Government doing their best to mitigate the worst, but stymied by the broken politics of this union and this economic madness we heard from the Chancellor today. Scotland is looking for a different path, Mr. Speaker. Scotland needs independence.
What Scotland doesn't need is reheated socialism from the SNP. She mentioned energy, and I'm always staggered when people in her party mention energy and they don't countenance nuclear power. Nuclear power is a great, clean form of energy. And while we speak about energy, she will know that we have indeed listened. We have implemented a limit to energy prices. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who's no longer in her place, made the engagement within 2 days of taking office, and it's something which I'm very proud of, and we've also extended it to supporting businesses.
In fairness, the spokesman for the SNP was heard in silence by members on this side. I certainly expect the answer to be heard in silence, and especially as it affects the constituencies concerned. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
And I was very surprised to hear her mention energy, given the SNP's appalling record in that regard. I'm very open to her ideas, but I would very much recommend that she pursues nuclear power, which has got a great tradition in Scotland.
John Glenn.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the aspirations for growth, and all governments, all Conservative chancellors should have their minds focused on sustainable growth. I welcome the measures on EIS and SEIS which were planned. I note the economic logic behind the bankers' bonus cap change. But what I would say is that in my 4.5 years as City Minister, the biggest concern that banks had was for the overall tax burden, and I would urge him to keep a focus on the global competitiveness of that. But the final point I would like to make is, in an era of grave uncertainty around inflation, there is a clear concern in the markets around the irreconcilable realities of monetary tightening at the same time as fiscal loosening. And I would welcome the Chancellor's observations and reassurance to the markets at this time.
In terms of the 2 points he made, he's absolutely right to say bankers are concerned about the overall tax burden. And that's why many of the bankers in the City of London are going to Paris, because they're paying 30% tax there. That's a legitimate thing, and that's why we've reduced tax levels. With respect to monetary and fiscal policy, he will know that monetary policy is a responsibility of the bank, and monetary policy is targeted on inflation, and the fiscal policy that fiscal course that we've charted has absorbed two exogenous shocks in the form of COVID-19 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it is entirely appropriate in both those circumstances to have a looser fiscal policy to steer our path through those shocks. There's entire logic to those positions.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Chancellor, without giving us any sign of the figures, has had a budget now, has announced what is in effect a budget with massive tax cuts, most of which go to those who are already well off. And he has asserted, Mr. Speaker, that this will lead to growth. But he must now admit that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that large tax cuts for the already well-off actually lead to growth. In fact, the IMF has said the opposite.
In response to that, I would say that there is plenty of evidence that high tax, high regulation socialism leads to a complete disaster as far as economic outcomes are concerned. And we are doing the opposite.
Andrea Lebs. Dame Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend for the incredibly broad package of support for all those who are faced with massive energy bills right now? And does he share my concern that members opposite are talking down the size of that package, and that in itself is causing grave concern amongst pensioners and families who are not therefore understanding that actually help is on its way and that the government has sought to deal with that very grave concern?
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for pointing out that the scale of the intervention is unprecedented and millions of people and businesses will be helped by what the government is doing. I'd like to thank her very much for that.
John MacDonald.
The cut of the 45p rate benefits the richest 1% in our society. Combined with lifting the cap on bonuses and his attack on those on universal credit, does he not realise that this is the most socially divisive budget in a generation? And has he not looked at history of engineered booms of this sort, which in the 1960s, the dash for growth created catastrophe in our economy, the Barber boom of the 70s created unemployment, and the Lawson boom eventually created chaos. The only benefit which each of those three engineered booms resulted in the fall of a Tory government.
All I remember was the financial crisis of 2008, which his own party presided over and managed to engineer. The other point I would mention is that the 40p rate was the rate for 20 years, and it was actually the rate that adopted by his party when they were successful and they used to win elections.
John Redwood.
I strongly welcome the growth plan and the tax cuts that will help deliver it. And does he agree with me that there are more obstacles to be swept aside so that we can grow more of our own food, produce more of our own energy, supply more of our own goods, to raise the living standards, generate the better jobs that we all want?
As so often, my right honourable friend is 100% right.
Sarah Olney.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government is completely out of touch. Today we've witnessed the biggest and most irresponsible increase in borrowing in recent times, borrowing that could have been offset by increasing the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. But instead, this bill will be paid by millions of householders through higher taxes for years to come. And the Chancellor's excuse for this reckless approach is that it will lead to growth, which will supposedly trickle down as higher prosperity for the rest of us. So will the Chancellor explain to my constituents how handing £45 billion of their taxes to the UK's most profitable companies and the wealthiest individuals will help them to get a GP appointment when they need it, give their children a better education and make their streets safer?
Very good. So what the Honourable Lady didn't mention in her question was the fact that a growing economy creates growing tax revenues which pay for public services. Her high tax approach, her high tax, high spend approach leads to a cycle of stagnation. We want to break free of that.
Kevin Hollinray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Growth and cutting of taxes are true Conservative principles. So is balancing the books. By my calculations, the deficit this year, based on his announcements, will be in the region of £250 billion. Probably £150 billion. That's certainly the evidence we got to the Treasury Select Committee yesterday. I'd be interested in his actual forecast if that's not the case. But can he confirm, as he seeks to balance the books in the future, because of course there will be a higher deficit either way on this announcement, he will not do so by cutting investment in the North, infrastructure investment in the North, whatever the outcome may be in terms of his likely growth path from here?
So my honourable friend will know that through growth we will get more tax receipts, which will actually, over the medium term, reduce certainly the net debt to GDP ratio, and that's 100% what we're focused on. And he's right that in the past we've tended to reduce expenditure on capital projects, and we mustn't do that in the future if we're to pursue our goals in terms of levelling up.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We expect our government to implement policy based on evidence. And as a student of history, the Chancellor will be familiar with Anthony Barber's 1970 disastrous economic experiment. Same thing, low tax, deregulation, desperate quest for growth, and all that did was lead to the Barber boom, followed by a big crash, 3-day working week, and it turned to bust. The Chancellor is risking all our livelihoods, he's risking our economy, and he's risking our public finances on the altar of a discredited ideology. A tsunami of tax cuts and giveaways to 80,000 Conservative members who voted the Prime Minister into office, and little for the 80% of Britons who are struggling and facing a tough winter ahead is outrageous. According to Einstein, Mr. Speaker, insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results. My question to the Chancellor is this: can he not see that his budget is madness?
No, I think it's perfectly sane to want to grow the British economy by creating incentives. And on the Barber boom, I mean, she's a student of history. The Barber boom was driven very primarily by very loose monetary policy. It was essentially a demand sort of pump priming experiment. This is the opposite of that. What we're trying to do is to create incentives and also look at supply side reform. It's a completely different model.
Greg Hans.
I congratulate the Chancellor on the measures announced today, and congratulate him personally as well on his new role, particularly the cut in base rate, the abolition of the 45p rate, the stamp duty cut, and also the return of tax-free shopping to visitors, which will be very much welcomed in central London. Could I ask him to look further at the 7-year bonus deferral rules in financial services, which are actually amongst the most punitive in the world today?
Absolutely. I will be updating the House on measures for the financial services to try and make sure that they become, as they have been in the past, a world-leading industry.
Sammy Wilson.
I think many people will be astounded at the reaction there has been today at the Chancellor's proposal to increase economic growth in the United Kingdom, which will increase standard of living, increase employment, help to raise revenue for public services and reduce the national debt. I only hope that the Brexit freedoms that he's talking about, once we are free of the Northern Ireland Protocol, will lead to investment zones and regulatory reform in Northern Ireland. But would the Chancellor consider two things to help working families? First of all, as far as childcare tax-free allowances are concerned, which would be an immense help for working families, would he consider an increase in that? And since 2/3 of people in Northern Ireland rely on home heating oil, would he accept that £100 of an increase when there's been a 300% increase in the price of heating oil is not acceptable?
On those three issues, we're absolutely looking at the childcare issue, and I'm sure colleagues, one of my cabinet colleagues will update the House on that. We're talking about the heating oil intervention. And on investment zones, we are very, very willing and eager to engage with Northern Ireland colleagues and friends on working out how we can roll out investment zones in Northern Ireland.
Anthony Brown.
I strongly welcome this radical and generous package of measures to promote growth and provide support for households. And I also very much welcome the fact that we're positioning the Conservative Party as a low-tax party. And I join my colleagues in welcoming the cuts to income tax and corporation tax and various other taxes. I also particularly welcome the cut to the most economically damaging of all taxes, which is stamp duty, which is seen as reducing labour mobility, clogging up the housing market. That cut is welcome. But groups like the Institute for Fiscal Studies have called for the full abolition of stamp duty to promote economic growth. Will my right honourable friend the Chancellor go even further and look at further cuts to stamp duty to reduce the economic damage it causes and the damage to households?
My honourable friend, whose policy prescriptions are always very interesting and very valuable. I've only been in post 2.5 weeks, but I'd be very happy. To discuss with him how we can simplify our tax system.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. We know that inflation is way off target, and today's announcement of £45 billion worth of tax cuts is going to make that worse, forcing the Bank of England to have to consistently continue to raise mortgage rates, and that's going to hammer homeowners and mortgage holders. The Chancellor hasn't published the OBR analysis. Isn't it time he does? And isn't the reason why he's not publishing it is because they reveal that he has broken the fiscal rules he voted for and will not achieve the growth target that he set himself?
As I reminded my right honourable friend, the OBR, and I said in my statement, the OBR will be coming up with a forecast certainly before the end of the calendar year, and I'm very, very interested to hear and to see what they have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And President Putin has weaponised the cost of energy against Western economies, and the measures announced today are very welcome in helping our constituents with temporary support through this terrible time of invasion. Will the Chancellor confirm that the measures he's announced today that support business will also continue to incentivise investment in renewable energy in this country so that we can never allow Putin to weaponise energy against us again?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point with regard to renewables. It's always salutary to remind the House we've got 11, nearly 12 gigawatts of installed capacity of offshore wind, which makes us the second only to China in terms of the offshore wind rollout. And there's no reason why we can't continue to lead the world in renewables, particularly in offshore wind, solar and other forms of renewable power.
Emma Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, does the Chancellor agree with the former Bank of England rate setter Martin Wheel, who says that the government's approach could end in tears with a run on the pound?
What will end in tears is high taxes, high spend and very low growth. And that's what exactly the iron circle that we're trying to break.
Andrew Mitchell.
I very much welcome what my right honourable friend has said in respect of growth about investment zones, which he says will come to the West Midlands. I think that will be very helpful in levelling up in the West Midlands and the Birmingham area. Can I remind him of the importance of the UK investment in tackling international problems, whether it's pandemics, illegal migration or climate change? That's about British expertise, but it's also about British money. Can he confirm to the House that we are on track to restore what was a manifesto promise of bringing back the 0.7 in 2024?
Chancellor.
We're always looking at our manifesto commitments, and given our leadership in this, I hope that we can come to the 0.7 as soon as is practicable and the finances, the public finances allow.
Ben Lake.
The Chancellor began his statement by stating that the government will be cutting everyone's energy bill by an average of £1,400. But there are concerns, of course, whether this will indeed be the case for households and businesses that are not connected to the mains gas grid. Some 74% of properties in Ceredigion depend on alternate fuels that will not be subject to the measures announced this week. Therefore, will there be further support for such households and businesses to ensure that they benefit in a similar way to those that are connected to the mains gas grid?
Yeah, we're discussing support for off-grid properties, people who rely on heating oil and other forms of energy. And that's something which my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, Energy Secretary, will be discussing as well, and will set forth in more detail very soon.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the short-term support on energy costs the government is pursuing, and I welcome too the government's focus on growth in the longer term. But would my right honourable friend agree that growth is dependent on confidence? Confidence of businesses, but also confidence of households who spend on the products and services those businesses create. And would you also agree that that confidence will evaporate if people's costs on their mortgage increase further than the benefits that they gain from tax reductions? And will he do all he can to make sure that doesn't?
That and also reducing the tax burden. But he's quite right that there is a risk in respect of interest rates, and I'm speaking to the Governor regularly to see what his views are on that. We're working closely together, and we will be very focused on alleviating the burden on our constituents.
George Howard.
The Chancellor proclaimed the end of redistribution. Well, I listened very carefully, Mr. Speaker, to the measures he announced, and it strikes me that they are redistributive measures. They redistribute away from those in the greatest need to those in the least need. How, Mr. Speaker, does in that context, how does he defend spending £10 billion a year on the buy-to-let scheme, which serves only to help those who don't need it to buy houses that they don't live in, and serves no purpose whatsoever for those who end up renting them?
Just in the statement on helping people, there are measures in our statement across the income scale, and we are very, very focused not on growth. So what I said was that we indulge in a fight on redistributing something which is small, which we should be trying to grow, and that's where our focus is.
James Cartledge.
I congratulate my right honourable friend on his statement and his position. He knows that to increase output, he needs there to be capacity in the labour market, and that is extremely tight. He will come under huge pressure for loosening immigration rules. Can I urge him instead, as he said, to focus on the economically inactive, to ensure that they get the support? Because is it not the case that those who've been written off, yes, mild mental health, anxiety and all the rest of it, if they get the right support, it's in their interest to get back to work, and it's in the interest of their self-esteem?
The friend is absolutely right. There is a huge impetus, there's a huge pool of talent that needs to be brought into the labour market, and every government, our government in particular, should be focused on trying to bring more people into the labour market.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor is midwife to profiteering by energy companies on the public's credit card. He's done very little, as my friend from Ceredigion said, about rural and island places dependent on central heating oil. People in my constituency on electricity are having a unit rate of 33 pence, while in London it's 29.6 pence, 10% higher. The standing charge is 51 pence in my constituency, 32% in London, a staggering 60% higher. And these are figures from E.ON yesterday. This UK government is a highwayman, absolutely stealing from energy-rich Scotland. It is a disgrace. And this Chancellor should be conducting himself far more fairly than he is. This is, as has been said, something for the rich and not for the deserving.
I reject that, and he will know that when I was Business, Energy and Industrial Secretary, Industrial Strategy Secretary, I was very focused on bringing the renewable pot for remote island wind. And we achieved great things working together, and I hope that we can continue that dialogue now I'm in this office.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome our honourable friend to his place, and how refreshing to hear some Conservative policies. Weymouth is talking with officials about the idea of an investment zone. We are entirely supportive and we very much hope we get it. But what they ask for, if we do get it, that we get the infrastructure funding to go with it, for without that we will not attract the private investment that we need to create the prosperity and jobs.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We're trying to link the investment zones, and we will link the investment zones to infrastructure projects, because one without the other doesn't make sense. But I'd be very interested to talk to him about Weymouth and about the opportunities for investment zones in that area.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've seen this Chancellor rip up fiscal responsibilities, sack the senior civil servant at the Treasury, and mortgage our children's and our country's future. And it's not just me that's concerned about his ambition for growth. The Institute for Fiscal Studies tells us that we shouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge. I hopefully don't know anyone does that. An increase in annual growth of more than 0.7% of national income, the increase required just to stabilise debt as a share of GDP, would be equivalent to the difference between the growth in the UK experienced in the 25 years from 1983. There is no miracle cure, they say. There is not. Can the Chancellor just admit that he's fiscally irresponsible and that he's gambling with this country's future?
I don't admit that at all. In fact, the gamble was to do nothing. The gamble was to stick on the path that we were on and simply raise spending and raise taxes and think somehow magically we were going to get to the promised land. That was not a credible path. This is.
Nikki Aikey.
I certainly welcome the comprehensive growth plan that the Chancellor has outlined today. I particularly welcome the reintroducing of tax-free shopping for international visitors. I hope that also now includes EU citizens. This Chancellor, this government sounds like it's very much a reforming government, and I welcome that. Can you please, can my right honourable friend please guarantee that he will consider now reforming one of the most antiquated, punitive taxes we have, business rates?
A tax review to fit our tax system to the 21st century, and I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friend and her campaign on VAT, the business secretary, and I hope that we can actually deliver on her vision.
Kenny McCaskill.
The world has seen this dogma over orthodoxy before, in Pinochet's Chile adopting the Chicago Boys. That tanked the Chilean economy, and this will do the same to the UK economy. The pound will tank, inflation will rise, and unemployment will escalate. Social discord will also come as a result. The Chancellor says that tax is not simply about revenue, but about the economy. I agree. But it's also about the society that you want. Yep. And what he is doing is taking from the poor and giving to the rich. Giving to this generation and impoverishing the young and future generations. Ensuring that the UK becomes an ever more unequal society. That comes at a cost not just in unemployment, but all sorts of social issues that we saw in the 1980s. That's why Scotland demands its referendum. We want the opportunity to continue to build a better and fairer society. This is a route to disaster that will be paid not just by the poor, but indeed by middle income, and only the rich will benefit.
Well, I'm glad to hear the honourable gentleman's optimistic assessment of my growth plan, but I think he's entirely wrong. I think what we have to do is focus on growth. That's what we're doing, and that's what we will be delivering.
Rick Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. He's absolutely right to focus the Treasury on growth. One of the most important sources of that is to build on our excellence in science and innovation. So will my right honourable friend say whether he's still committed to reaching the 2.4% international average for R&D investment by 2027 and to achieve his target of 20 billion by the end of this Parliament?
And I want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend's tenure in Bays. He was a great Secretary of State who really championed science. I did try to do the same in that post, and I look forward to engaging with him on the science agenda going forward.
John Trickey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And isn't it clear that the Chancellor's growth plan only grows one part of the economy, and that's the bankers' bonuses and the incomes of the richest in our society? And if the Chancellor really wants to cut through the cycle of low pay, poor productivity and low economic growth, shouldn't he actually be abandoning his ideological commitment to trickle-down economics and finally announce a massive public programme of investment in England and Britain's regions and nations?
So we do have a massive programme of investment, and it's called business and the private sector being able to mobilise capital to act in such institutions like investment zones. That's a really radical plan, and I was delighted to announce it this morning.
Robert Halford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the income tax cuts and the energy rebates and the freeze, as well as the other cost of living measures, which will enormously help my constituents, many of whom are working 7 days a week just to keep their heads above water. If I could just ask my right honourable friend, he knows that petrol and diesel prices have been historic highs and that hauliers have been paying up to £125 more every time they fill up. White van men and women filling up £25 more every time they fill up at the petrol stations. So will my right honourable friend, when he comes back and does a full budget, please do everything he can to cut fuel duty, because as he has made clear, he's a tax-cutting Chancellor.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to engage my right honourable friend on that. I've entered the House at the same time as he did, and I know that nobody has been more tireless and unstinting in supporting his constituents and focusing on lessening the tax burden.
Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We welcome the Chancellor's targets to get back to levels of growth last sustained under a Labour government. Yeah. But under the Conservatives, the UK is currently forecast to have the slowest growth rate of any advanced economy next year. So can the Chancellor tell us what the OBR's estimate is of the impact of the measures announced today on growth?
Yeah, as I said, the OBR will come up with a full forecast before the end of the calendar year.
Very clear they don't like Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is well aware of the great opportunities in northern Lincolnshire and the Humber region, particularly surrounding renewable energy, and I welcome his announcement relating to investment zones, and I and the two Conservative local authorities in my constituency want to work with him to deliver that. But even sooner, we can actually deliver on the Humber Freeports. Can he confirm that the Freeport designation will continue, and will he unblock the process that is delaying the launch of the Freeport?
The Freeports are certainly continuing, and I'll be very happy to speak to my honourable friend about how we can, as he says, as he puts it, unblock the process to accelerate the Humber Freeport bid.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This budget amounts to an Environment Wreckers Charter, and it is also a statement of missed opportunities. For example, a report just this week shows that a major programme of insulating homes in Britain and installing heat pumps could benefit the economy by £7 billion a year, create 140,000 jobs, by 2030, get our fuel bills down, get climate emissions down too. Tucked away in the growth report on page 14, there is a tiny reference to some investment in energy efficiency. It is nowhere near enough. Why is he setting his face against the kind of retrofit revolution that offers the only viable way out of the current crisis, as well as reducing our dependence on fossil fuels? Is it because, for him, dogma and deregulation trump evidence and common sense every time?
It's not about dogma and deregulation. In fact, in terms of the eco and energy efficiency measures, I have campaigned for them certainly when I was business secretary, and I made sure that there was, in fact, reference in the growth plan to the eco plan. And we're going to try, and we may well expand that at a future date.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nuclear power must form part of a diversified energy portfolio. Can I welcome the measures that the Chancellor has announced today, particularly accelerating energy infrastructure? Can he just say a few words about whether his welcome package includes accelerating modular nuclear reactors? This is the future of the nuclear industry. Would you like to say a few words about that?
Look, I was very focused, as he knows, on SMR production when I was base Secretary of State, and it's something that I want to, the thinking about that, I want to bring into the heart of the Treasury. There's still negotiations to be had, but he's absolutely right. SMRs, nuclear, that's part of our energy mix in the future.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Chancellor just confirm for me that he has just announced a tax cut that means someone earning £1 million will be £40,000 better off? That is more than a nurse earns and over £10,000 more than the average wage in Birmingham.
Yeah. What I am going to confirm is that the top rate of tax, has gone back to what it was before she entered the House, but when the party opposite was successful and winning elections. The top rate was for 20 years, and that's what we've gone back to.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth area, there is already an enterprise zone which has been very successful, though the land allocated needs to be adjusted to take advantage of the opportunities in the offshore energy and a revived fishing industry. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this existing enterprise zone will benefit from the opportunities that will be provided for the investment zones that he's announced?
Chancellor.
The enterprise zones, free ports, new investment zones will all benefit from tax reduction, planning, relaxation, and of course there will come a time when other zones, other people, other places will want to become investment zones. This is a huge opportunity for communities up and down the country.
Catherine McKinnell.
Government and another growth plan. Yet the reality is the child poverty gap between the North East and the rest of the country is at a 20-year high. So can the Chancellor explain how giving these tax cuts to the most wealthy will put food on the table of children living below the poverty line in Newcastle this winter?
When a recession and economic downturns have hit in the past, the people most adversely affected are the most vulnerable in society. That means that we have a duty to grow the economy and to make sure that we turbocharge growth. That's how we will help all of our constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the return to low tax free market principles that we on this side know will lead to growth and prosperity for everybody in our country. Now, we know the role that the self-employed and entrepreneurs played in growing the economy and getting us back to prosperity after the mess the party opposite made of the economy when they were last in government. So I was delighted to see the reforms to IR35 in my right honourable friend's statement. Can he confirm that with 12,000 registered self-employed in my constituency, those reforms will come quickly to give the self-employed of today, the entrepreneurs of tomorrow and the businesses that might contract their services the confidence to get on and grow?
Chancellor.
Absolutely, 100%.
Justin Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, this statement seems completely divorced from the realities of most people's lives. The Chancellor's made the choice to deliberately remove the cap from bankers' bonuses while deliberately ignoring the needs of people who are already struggling to make ends meet. So what is his message to these people, the people who are not going to benefit from his love-in with the super-rich? How does he think people are going to manage? Does the Chancellor just not care?
Yeah, that's why we had the energy intervention that was announced last week and that we put forward that we've mentioned today. We've got eco schemes, we've got the warm homes discount. We've had a reduction of council tax A to D. There's a huge amount of intervention and we will always...
My friend has made clear his intention to lift the bankers' bonus cap, but may I draw his attention to another cap or threshold, the £40,000 annual pension allowance, which is also causing challenges, particularly to many experienced and senior public sector workers. My right honourable friend will be aware of the challenges, NHS workforce challenges that our health service currently faces, and unless this issue is dealt with effectively, and we scrap the £40,000 annual allowance for defined benefit pension schemes, we're going to lose a lot of very experienced clinicians at a time when the NHS needs them the most. He can look at bankers' bonuses. Can he also look at this issue?
Yeah, the issue has been raised. And it's not just a question of the annual limit, it's also the lifetime allowance. I mean, anecdotally, I hear that is also a big driver. The fact that it's been reduced successively over time is a big driver of people leaving the profession. And that's something I'd be very happy to have a discussion with him about in the future.
Mohammed Yazid.
While millions struggle with the cost of living, the Chancellor's first priority is to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses and tighten the rules on benefits for those who have the least. The government has already forgotten that the bonus culture led to the banking crash. Lowering regulations put in place to protect ordinary people and their pension is dangerous. This is Tory austerity all over again, making the rich richer and the poorest poorer. At the time when key workers are being denied a decent pay rise, so why has the Chancellor chosen to help with the wealthy chums?
Chancellor.
The focus of the growth plan is on growth. It's on getting our economy moving and getting to 2.5%. That's the lens through which I am looking at this problem. And I'd be very, very happy to remind him of support.
David Rutley.
Mr. Speaker, growth sectors such as pharmaceuticals will no doubt welcome my right honourable friend's steps on corporation tax. Does he agree that supply-side reforms are also required, with the Department of Health and BEIS working with greater urgency to approve and adopt clinically proven medical treatments to more fully realise the potential of the UK life sciences sector?
Very pleased to confirm to my honourable friend that is exactly what we need to be driving forward. We need to be accelerating process so that we can actually deliver outcomes more quickly. And I pay tribute also to the fact that he and I have been debating, talking about these issues for many years now. And I'm very, very pleased that he still remains as focused on growth as he did many years ago.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you. It may be a very uncomfortable truth for some, but the biggest barrier to growth at present is the fact that there's increased barriers to trade with our dearest neighbour in the European Union as a result of Brexit. And of course there is an alternative reality here today as well, which would be a windfall tax, increased windfall tax on energy companies, investment in a Green New Deal, investment in skills and sound public finances. And how on earth can we look our constituents in the eye whenever they're only being offered £100 for home heating oil, whenever potentially people are going to get thousands in extra benefits today? The wealth is in our society.
I think we're looking at the heating oil issue. My right honourable friend, the Business and Energy Secretary, is looking at this, and we will come to a decision on Northern Ireland, I think, very imminent.
George Freeman.
Madam Speaker, could I thank the Chancellor for putting growth at the heart of his mission in the Treasury and for challenging Treasury orthodoxy and making that the priority, and in particular recognising the potential of Norfolk. Would he agree with me that there are different types of growth, and we need growth that drives levelling up, strengthens the union, that drives innovation for higher productivity, and that science, technology and innovation are fundamental to it? And would he agree with me, echoing the comments of my right honourable friend, the Chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee, that we need the Treasury to move quickly to unlock private investment in fast-growing sectors?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'd like to pay tribute to his service as Science Minister when I was Secretary of State in BEIS. We worked very closely together then, and I hope we can work closely now to make sure that Treasury and other departments are as focused on the science and technology agenda as my honourable friend.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the Chancellor give the important assurance that his predecessor gave, that social security benefits will be fully uprated in the usual way, in line with this month's inflation figure?
We will make announcements about that in due course. This is
Helen Whately.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's focus and drive for increased economic growth and for making sure people get to keep more of what they earn? Can I ask him to assure me as part of that that government will be absolutely focused as well on reducing the barriers that sometimes prevent people from working more and earning more, particularly skills and childcare?
I think the childcare issue has been raised many times, and I'm looking forward to a more subsequent statement from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education. That's clearly an issue which can unlock growth and also protect families so that they can go out and earn money to look after their family. I mean, that's really important.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, surely the Chancellor understands that the cut in stamp duty will do nothing to help 99% of people who can't quite afford their own home. It will do huge amounts to incentivise people who want second, third, fourth and fifth homes in my constituency, in Cumbria and other rural parts of Britain. Does he not realise the damage that excessive second home ownership and non-permanent occupied dwellings does to communities like mine, those in Cornwall, those in Northumberland and the rest of the country? Will he listen to rural Britain and stop backing second homeowners and back our communities instead?
We are backing his communities. We are backing communities by reducing taxes, by creating the potential for investment zones, by the energy intervention, whole host of measures that are backing ordinary, hard-working people.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome much of the announcement. Can I in particular welcome the change to IR35? As the Chancellor will know, that has caused real distress and injustice to many honest, hard-working, self-employed people. I also welcome the changes to stamp duty. But will he bear in mind, as I'm sure he does as a Conservative, that we also believe in sound money and that we must keep an eye upon inflation, because we do not want the benefit of the stamp duty cut to be eroded for many homeowners by the increased mortgage costs?
Absolutely, and he will understand. I mean, historically, if you look at high periods of debt, we managed to get out of that by growing our economy. That's why we've got a renewed focus on growth. What we can't do is simply tax our way to prosperity. That has never happened before.
Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, can I inform the Chancellor of the Exchequer that that was probably the most disappointing presentation I've had since I came into the House since 1979. And the fact of the matter is, what exactly is he hiding? Is he hiding the fact that what he's announced today will mean that in the future, my children, our grandchildren, will have to pay the price of what he's announced today? Isn't that the truth? We're going to put this borrowing on future generations, and that will blight the whole future of that generation.
What I find extraordinary, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that people on the benches opposite stood on a platform of pure, unadulterated socialism in 2019, which was totally reckless, and had no interest in the private sector. What we're doing is putting more money into the pockets of people and businesses. That's what drives growth.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it not the case that already the Chancellor's intervention to freeze energy bills is predicted to reduce inflation by 5 percentage points, and that for every single percentage point that inflation comes down by, it reduces our borrowing costs by £6 billion. And therefore, by simple economics, which the party opposite need a bit of a lesson, it is entirely feasible that within the G7 we have GDP. It makes this growth strategy entirely plausible.
He's absolutely right. Because of careful stewardship of the public finances, we can withstand the exogenous shocks represented by COVID-19 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've got the second lowest net debt to GDP in the G7, and we will use our fiscal position, to help the most vulnerable in society.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the Chancellor came to his feet, the value of the UK government bonds has plummeted, which will put the national debt into a serious crisis for generations to come. How is he going to mitigate that loss?
The markets react as they will, but the growth plan will very soon show that we're on the right course and that we're steering us to a more prosperous future.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the focus on putting rocket boosters under Britain's brilliant technology sector in the Chancellor's budget. But those internet businesses are open 24/7. This is a deregulating government. I wonder if the Chancellor would look at deregulating Sunday opening hours so that we can compete on the high street just as we can compete on the internet.
We've looked at this in the past. It was not without controversy, but I'd be very happy to hear his ideas on this subject.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor argues on the one hand that those on the lowest incomes, people on universal credit, should face the threat of their income being reduced further in order to boost economic growth, while on the other hand, he says to people already on the highest income, bankers, that they need an increase in their incomes through their bonuses in order to do the same. How on earth is that fair?
So, just a very basic lesson. We tax bonuses currently at about 50%, and that goes into public services, and it's absolutely legitimate to get more people into the labour market. That seems a reasonable thing to want to do.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As chair of the Anglesey Freeport Bidding Consortium, I am delighted with the announcement of new investment zones by the UK Government. Can the Chancellor say what this means for Unismore and its Freeport bid, especially with the deadline to submit by the 24th of November?
Unismore has a fantastic Member of Parliament in my honourable friend, and we are also not only focused on Freeport, but on nuclear, the future of nuclear, and Unismore represents a hugely exciting opportunity in that regard.
Andrew Gwynn.
So the Chancellor has admitted that the last 12 Tory years... But the real impact of this budget is that we are piling on debt for future generations. It's unaffordable, and if the Chancellor were a local councillor presenting this as a budget, his monitoring officer would be issuing him with a Section 114 notice, and his ministers would be calling in the commissioners.
So the focus is on growth. As my honourable friend said, our net debt to GDP ratio is low compared to G7, and we are 100% focused on growing the economy so that future generations will be able to deal with the fiscal shocks that they have to deal with. That's what the purpose of this is.
Sarah Brickcliffe.
Speaker, getting through key infrastructure projects and the announcement of investment zones, whilst helping families and businesses with their energy costs, is key for people in Ham and Haslingden. But Lancashire has been announced as an area that can be an investment zone, but there are significant differences and problems between West Lancashire and East Lancashire. So could the Chancellor say whether it is possible for areas to have 2 investment zones in a county?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason why we can't have lots of different investment zones dotted around in lots of areas in the country. The Deluxe Secretary is conversing, is engaged in conversations as we speak with various local authorities to see whether they can accommodate investment zones.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wasn't aware new legislation was introduced during a fiscal statement, announcing a plan to this House to annihilate workers' rights during a statement framed at supporting our constituents and these very workers through the energy crisis is a new low even for a Tory government. I would say this government, but the faces change on these benches that often that I can't possibly say this government. I would ask if he would scrap these plans, but these are not the plans of a Chancellor. Isn't it the case that they're the ill-thought-out plans of a power-hungry Tory leadership candidate and they must be scrapped?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I didn't mention anything in my statement on workers' rights, and I've always been very focused on broader workers' rights, and no, the right to strike. No, the minimum service levels are absolutely crucial to make sure that the public is protected from militant trade union action. It's entirely fair. It's what happens in Europe, and we are 100% committed to that.
Anthony Higginbottom.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome the Secretary of State's focus on growth, which will allow businesses in Burnley and Paddington to grow and allow people to keep more of the money they earn. Following on from my honourable friend, the member for Hindburn, in East Lancashire, we stand ready to lead this country in aerospace, in cyber, in small modular reactors. So can I urge the Chancellor to look sympathetically on a bid from East Lancashire, and would he meet with myself and other East Lancashire colleagues and the leader of Lancashire County Council to talk about what an East Lancashire investment zone might look like?
So, just to remind my honourable friend, the investment zone conversations are being very much led by the DLUC Secretary of State. I'm sure he will be engaging with the relevant councils, and I'd be very happy also to talk to my honourable friend about the opportunities that investment zones represent.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just take the Chancellor back to his party's manifesto commitment around levelling up?
And what I want to know is, the investment zones, will they actually tackle the need for real infrastructure investment? So, for example, if he's really serious about growth, the need for the rail electrification line to Hull, which was ruled out in his party's integrated rail plan just last November for the next 30 years. Will he look at that again if he's serious about growth?
We're always looking at infrastructure projects and measuring their benefit-cost ratio. And of course, as far as investment zones are concerned, of course, they're naturally allied to key bits of infrastructure and they have to be coordinated. That's one of the purposes of what we're trying to announce.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Investment zones have potential to make a massive contribution to levelling up for areas like Dudley South. But can the Chancellor reassure my constituents that the more liberalised planning regulations won't mean that communities have to sacrifice precious green belt as the price for an enterprise zone?
It's absolutely right. The whole premise and basis of the investment zone conversation is mutual consent. There has to be a mutual consent. They won't be imposed in any area. And absolutely, local residents will have, and councils will have a huge say in terms of how the investment zone develops.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Deputy Speaker, would the Chancellor of the Exchequer explain where is the morality in giving a huge increase in income to the very richest in our society and threatening the benefits of the very poorest in our society who are trying to get by on universal credit? What estimate has he got of the levels of inequality that will exist in this country in 1 year's time and in 5 years' time as a result of his statement today?
It is always our duty to help the most vulnerable in society. That's why we've had the energy intervention. That's why we had the COVID-19 pandemic intervention. But also, it is incumbent on the government to try and seek to enable growth. And that's what we're focused on too in this plan.
Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend to his position, and he will know from his previous portfolio that high-intensive energy industries have been acutely affected by the rising cost of energy prices. So I do welcome the government's intervention around energy prices. But what we need to see in the Black Country, particularly in our advanced manufacturing and metals industries, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this point was stressed yesterday to our right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is to ensure that there is continued communication between the Treasury and obviously the Department for Business. So can my right honourable friend just reassure me that those discussions will be ongoing, and he will assure that as circumstances perhaps change for high-intense energy industries, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Treasury remains open to carry on that dialogue?
He will appreciate that as Bay's Secretary, I was very focused on energy-intensive industries. I did engage Treasury colleagues then, and now I am in the Treasury. I'll be very happy to engage Bay's colleagues on this pressing issue.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It must surely be the definition of chutzpah to come to the House of Commons and complain about high taxation and low growth when you voted for 15 increase in taxation and you've been the Business Secretary who has taken the UK into recession. It must surely be the definition of chutzpah to come to the House of Commons and say that you believe in sound money when you've just put £72.4 billion on the Never Never credit card for the country. Let me just explain to him why people in the Rhondda might think he's got this wrong. We don't have any bankers begging for additional bonuses in the Rhondda. We don't have anybody, I would guess, earning more than £150,000 in the Rhondda. But we do have a lot of families whose energy bills have doubled, even after what he's done, have doubled this year and will be going into energy poverty, who are seeing food prices going up by 15% and petrol prices locally going up even more. That's why we think he's a disgrace.
We need a question. If there was no question, the Chancellor of the Exchequer can't answer it.
I'm not sure there was a question. I'm not sure there was a question. We've got to focus on growth, and through growth we get more tax revenue to pay for public services. That's a very fundamental notion, and that's what we're focused on.
Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's focus on productivity. Will he also be using fiscal levers to tackle the productivity of housing stock in tourist locations like my North Devon constituency, which sees winter ghost villages as second homes and holiday lets sit empty, resulting in local businesses having to close and endless businesses unable to recruit their good jobs as there is nowhere to live?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I'll absolutely be focused on that. I'd be very interested to hear more detail in a conversation with her to discuss what more we can do to free up the property market.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with your forbearance, I'd like to pass on to the House the sad news of the passing of my predecessor, Jim Sheridan. He diligently served the constituents of Paisley North and Remshire West, then Paisley and Remshire North for 14 years, and I'm sure the whole House's thoughts are with his wife Jean and his family and friends. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Jim and I didn't agree on everything, I think it's fair to say, but I'm certain that he and I would certainly agree wholeheartedly on the Chancellor's shameful and regressive statement. Workers' rights were important to Jim, as they are to me, so the further attack on those rights announced today is to the Chancellor's shame. But he spoke of the riddle of growth, so I wonder if he could riddle me this. How is it that giving bankers yet more millions drives economic growth, but giving those on benefits a fair deal or those on low wages a cost of living pay increase drives inflation?
Just before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to answer the question, may I, on behalf of the whole House, pass on to the family of Jim Sheridan, who was a much respected Member of Parliament here for a very important constituency, the condolences of the whole House. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I'll say very quickly that if bankers are working in London, they are taxed in London. If they move out of the UK, they're taxed elsewhere, and we don't see a penny of tax revenue. The City of London, the financial services, not just about the City of London, it's about Edinburgh, it's about a whole range of other countries, towns, have to be at the top, at the apex of the financial system, global financial system. We've got to attract the talent, and we can tax it, and that tax revenue is used to public services.
Craig McKinley.
Deputy Speaker, can I offer my, absolute congratulations for the Chancellor's growth plan. And he will know that my interest is in tax. The Register of Members' Interest will show that. And I'm delighted that we're seeing lower taxes and simpler taxes. And I think it would be fair to say that this party's inheritance of saying we're a party of low taxes had become somewhat opaque and confused over recent years. I wondered if he would agree with my very simplistic summary of what he is saying today, that this party believes in taking a smaller percentage out of a bigger pie rather than the state nicking more out of a static and diminishing pie, which seems to be the message of the party opposite, except for the DUP, of course.
I mean, we openly repudiate a socialist vision of society. We don't believe that the state should take more and more of people's income. We think that people should keep more and more of their earnings.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has sacked his Permanent Secretary, muzzled the Office for Budget Responsibility, and is man-marking the Governor of the Bank of England. His freewheeling ideology is crushing dissent. So can I ask the Chancellor, will the Governor of the Bank of England still be in his job by Christmas?
The Governor of the Bank of England is entirely independent, and I have to say to the honourable gentleman that we actually have struck some very good relations. We speak regularly. I think that's a good thing. He might think that's man-marking. I think it's very cordial. And we're exchanging ideas. And that's what we intend to do.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my honourable friend into his place. After decades of neglect and low aspiration under local opposition control, on behalf of the whole of Doncaster, I welcome this statement. If Peel Holdings today do the right thing, we will have saved our airport, and with low taxes at airports, an investment zone and a grant from BEIS for the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, Aspiration Doncaster can be achieved and levelling up will be delivered. So will the honourable member please meet with me and look at all the opportunities that are available from this statement for the people of Doncaster?
I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend and discuss the opportunities represented by investment zones and other of our policies.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has clearly put the interests of large energy firms ahead of those of families and small businesses. Isn't that why he's unwilling to publish the OBR's report?
That isn't true at all. We've actually intervened in a way that no government has done to protect people from gas price spikes. We've also focused on expanding supply. So I'd like to ask members opposite their view on North Sea oil, North Sea gas. We're actually expanding that, and that's something that we're proud to do, to expand capacity to reduce prices.
Jane Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, on an excellent speech and real focus on growth for this country. We are a nation of small businesses, both people who own those businesses and the employees who work there. And you've really, really listened, I would say, Chancellor, to those small businesses and understand the issues that they're facing. Given you've achieved all of this in only 2.5 weeks, I'm wondering if you could. I'm wondering if the Chancellor could let us know the likely timescales, and could they be just as quick on the repeal of IR35 and business rates reviews? Thank you.
I think we made announcements on IR35. I made an announcement this morning. I'd be very interested to hear her ideas on business rates, because that's an ongoing conversation, and I used to hear that the whole time when I was PPS to the Chancellor 5 years ago, and also as Chancellor, as she says, for 2.5 weeks.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to know how this Conservative plan for growth is going to help unpaid carers, who Carers UK estimate deliver £500 million worth of care a day. While I've been speaking to constituents in North East Fife about my carers leave bill, it's clear that carers allowance prevents people from working. So given that the Chancellor has failed to ensure or clarify whether we're going to see inflationary increases for benefits, will they at least look at ensuring that they don't impact with other benefits, or at the very least allow people to work more before their carers allowance is impacted?
Yeah, we're always looking at ways in which we can encourage people who are helping the most vulnerable in society do what is a critically important job. We're always looking at ways how we can improve that.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What's been announced today is more than just a fiscal event. It's a vote of confidence in Britain. A statement to the country that we can grow, we can aspire, and we can achieve. Rather than wilt in the face of our challenges, we can and we will flourish. Does my right honourable friend agree?
He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. We have a dynamic population, highly skilled people, and our job in government is to empower people to grow and to achieve and to thrive in the way he suggested.
Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Speaker. Well, during the last 12 years of Tory government, public services have been cut to the bone and are now facing rampant inflation and escalation of costs. So following his announcement, what reassurances can the Chancellor give that there will be no real terms cuts to the budgets of our public services?
I'm not going to make any statements about a budget here this morning.
Jerome Mayhew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, without growth, government just becomes an exercise in rearranging the deck chairs. So I absolutely welcome this unashamed focus on growth, because as the Honourable Member for Runnymede and Weybridge said, it's a vote of confidence in the future of our country. Let's look at the Western Link Road in my constituency. Does my right honourable friend agree that the decision to accelerate that project is exactly the kind of enabling infrastructure investment that helps local communities and unlocks local economic growth?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. By accelerating infrastructure projects, we can generate economic growth, we can generate achievement, we can infuse the supply chain and actually get Britain moving again.
Marion Fellows.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we want this country to be an entrepreneurial, share-owning democracy. I now want to extend an invitation to our current Chancellor to come to Motherwell Town Centre and Wishy Cross and try and explain this pie-in-the-sky ideology to folk in my constituency who are scared to go to sleep at night in case they can't wake up and heat their houses the next day or feed their families. Where do you think this ideology is going to help those constituents of mine?
It's not ideology. It's a practical focus on growing the economy so we have a more prosperous country. That's what governments should be doing. And the party opposite, the socialism that I don't know whether she represents that, isn't going to work.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I congratulate my right honourable friend on his focus on growth in his statement? And would the government consider a cross-border investment zone on the Welsh borders, covering North East Wales, where my constituency of Clwyd South is located, and part of North West England, given the very close economic interrelationship between the two areas?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
As I've said to other colleagues, the DLUC Secretary of State, my right honourable friend, is very much engaging with local councils on where these investment zones can be located. But I'd be very happy to speak to my honourable friend about looking at possibilities where we could locate investment zones in the region he suggested.
Matt Western.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since people close to the Treasury started trailing details about this mini-budget over the last 10 days, sterling has lost 5% in value against the dollar. Hasn't he just fired the starting gun on a run on the pound?
I know it's fashionable for members opposite to talk down Britain and talk down, and they're showing. I have to say they're showing an extraordinary interest. They're showing an extraordinary interest in the gyrations of markets. What will improve market sentiment is strong growth and a Britain that's open for business, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thousands of my constituents will welcome this statement, which will see the average working family in Blackpool over £1,500 per year better off through the combination of tax cuts and the energy price guarantee. They'll also welcome the opportunities this could present for jobs and investment in the new enterprise and investment zones. How quickly can we roll one of these out in Blackpool?
I'd be very interested to have a conversation with him about this and also refer him to my right honourable friend, the DLUC Secretary of State. He's engaged with these conversations as we speak.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So after 12 years of failure, the answer apparently is to first of all blame workers and their trade unions, and then to blame the planning system, the system they've been responsible for the last 12 years. Will the Chancellor explain, with regard to these new investment zones, which sound rather similar to the failed enterprise zones of the 1980s, what planning requirements are going to be abolished? Will that include the abolition of the requirement to build affordable homes for those that can't afford to buy? And has he done a detailed cost-benefit analysis of the proposals? Or if so, will he put that assessment in the library by the end of today?
The investment zones, as I said, the core principle of them is consent. They won't be imposed on people. And actually, the enterprise zone, as I look at places like Canary Wharf, there were successes. There have been successes of the enterprise zone, and I think the investment zones also will be successful and look back fondly.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome my right honourable friend, the Chancellor's statement? But more than that, could I welcome the clarity of his philosophy? We cannot tax our way to prosperity. We need economic growth. And could I also welcome the principle that my Newcastle underlying constituents will get to keep more of their own hard-earned money, both through the national insurance cancellation and through income tax? And could he set out how much better off a typical £30,000 a year earner will be because of the measures he set out today?
There'll be hundreds of pounds better off. The 1p rate is a £330 benefit. The energy intervention is roughly £1,200 per household. People all across our society will benefit from this approach that we're adopting. And as my honourable friend reminded the House, and the Socialists never have understood, you cannot tax, Madam Deputy Speaker, you cannot tax your way to prosperity.
Seema Malhotra.
It's already clear that this desperate bid for an economic bounce after a decade of failure is not based on a plan for growth, but a wing and a prayer that if the rich get richer, then all will be well. It comes at the price of higher borrowing and inflationary pressures that will result in interest rates and mortgage rates going up. So as he brings in large tax cuts for the already well-off, what is his message to his mortgage-paying constituents and mine, stuck on high interest rates, particularly those who are mortgage prisoners with SVRs they cannot change, who will be seeing their mortgage payments rise further and faster with his policies threatening the very home ownership he says he supports?
So the stamp duty nil band doubling is helping people buy a home. in her constituency and mine, there is an increase in the threshold as around the country, but that will help lots of people buying a home. The energy intervention will help her constituents and my constituents, and the reduction in the basic rate will also help many of her constituents.
Ben Bradley.
A Conservative Chancellor announcing that he intends to let people keep more of their own money and choose for themselves how to spend it. How refreshing, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm excited. And I'm also pleased that Nottinghamshire has been able to be part of early conversations about investment zones. Now, the county is also on the final shortlist for STEP nuclear fusion investment. Imagine for a second, Madam Deputy Speaker, that huge infrastructure investment in the future of our domestic energy supply, supported by the incentives and the growth opportunity of an investment zone. We have some vision in Nottinghamshire, Madam Deputy Speaker. It will require government departments to talk to each other. Can the Chancellor help?
Absolutely. We fully intend, while I'm in the Treasury, certainly to talk to departments to deliver the vision that I know he's driving in his constituency.
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Newcastle paid a very heavy price for Conservative austerity economics. Wages cut, public services slashed, growth stifled, businesses closed, good jobs lost. We were told there was no money to invest in the North East regional economic growth. Now, he is borrowing billions to gamble on tax cuts for the rich and boosting oil companies' profits. Still, working people are expected to foot the bill. So will he apologise to my constituents for making them poorer and expecting them to pay for it?
So the tax cuts I've announced, affect everybody who pays tax, and they will affect many people in her constituency. And I'm very, very pleased that through levelling up, we are now focused particularly on driving growth right across our country, particularly with investment zones. I look forward to the investment zone.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure many of my Edinburgh South West constituents will agree with me that threatening the low paid with sanctions while ensuring that bankers can get bigger bonuses is not a moral way to go about creating growth. Before the Chancellor says that Edinburgh will somehow benefit from this, can I assure him that most of my constituents that work in the financial sector will not benefit from these bonuses? But not content with doing that, he's also attacking the right of low-paid people to strike to get better pay and conditions. Now, the European Court of Human Rights has recently reaffirmed that under Article 11, the right to strike is a fundamental human right. So can the Chancellor answer me this question? Can he assure me that any legislation the government brings forward concerning strike rights will comply with the United Kingdom's treaty obligations under Article 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights?
The right to strike, there were two measures I referred to in this respect. The right to strike will not be compromised by minimum service levels, nor is it compromised by requiring union bosses to put a ballot to their entire membership ahead of a strike. These are not measures which conflict or in any way militate against the right to strike.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a budget and it should have been treated as such by the Chancellor. It is the budget which is lining the Savile Row pockets of their friends and allies in the city and their funders in the city too. Who's paying for this? Is it the oil companies making millions and billions? Is it the mega corporations making millions and billions? No, it is working people. Will he admit it?
What I will admit, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the plan is a plan for growth that's going to drive entrepreneurialism and endeavour and economic opportunity in this country, and everybody will benefit from it.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst the Chancellor was speaking so optimistically about growth, the city saw the FTSE 100 fall, the S&P 500 fall, and the pound fall to the lowest level since 1985. Now, he will appreciate that, given that oil and gas prices on the wholesale markets are in dollars, that has just increased still further the borrowing that he will have to pay for the package announced yesterday. But if he is so optimistic about growth, will he set a timescale? Will that timescale be 6 months? Will he retire in a year if the growth that he has predicated hasn't been achieved? Or is this an admission that he's going to stuff as much money into as many of his friends' pockets before the general election in 2024?
He will also know that over the last 2 or 3 months, oil and gas prices have come off quite a bit. So actually, the long-term contracts we're negotiating are just as likely to be much less costly than increasing costs. And of course, in terms of our growth plan, I'm not embarrassed about wanting to grow the British economy. I'm not embarrassed about driving opportunity in this country, and I don't believe that higher taxes lead to prosperity.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For the first time ever this year, the number of women aged 25 to 34 leaving the workforce to care for children is going up. 4 in 10 mothers have considered giving up work or cutting their hours because of the cost of childcare. More than a third of parents of primary-aged children are in part-time work. Why does the Chancellor think that bearing down with punitive sanctions on the lowest-paid working parents who work part-time will help them increase their hours, when what they really need is an accessible, affordable childcare system fit for the 21st century?
I think she's absolutely right to identify childcare as a crucial issue, and that's something which I'm looking forward to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, to update the House in the next few weeks.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Within seconds of the Chancellor's financial statement, he declared war on the trade unions. He declared war on those less well-off in society, those on universal credit. At the same time, scrapped the cap on bankers' bonuses. That's ideology. That's ideology unfettered. Can the Secretary of State say who will benefit most from the huge financial intervention today? Will it be someone on a salary similar to the right honourable gentleman, or someone like in my constituency, a two-parent family with 2 kids who are having to use or having to claim universal credit to top up their income?
So the energy intervention will help all his constituents deal with higher energy costs this winter, and the reduction in the basic rate, which we've pulled forward 1 year, will also help people to the tune of £330 a year. That's a broad swath of our countrymen and women.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One group who never get a mention in fiscal events from this government are millions of unpaid family carers. Yeah. There's no increase here for their miserly £67 a week carers allowance. If they work part-time, as we've already heard from other colleagues, this government is threatening them with sanctions if they don't increase the hours they work. Cost of living help? Only £150 to help disabled people and their carers. That won't even scratch the surface. So I asked the Chancellor what his plan with tax cuts for the highest earners says to those who do that vital work of caring for vulnerable and disabled people. He told the Honourable Member for North East Fife earlier that he wants to take opportunities to help them. He hasn't taken an opportunity to help them.
Yeah. We have. I mean, 2 measures. We've reversed the national insurance increase, which was a tax cut for 28 million people, worth £300 a year. We've also brought forward the reduction, 1p reduction in the basic rate to 19p, which is also helping people to the tune of £330 a year. That's help to lots and lots of our constituents.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm actually quite astonished because I don't think I've received a single letter from any constituents that are saying, from a fat cat or energy oligarch or of the richest 1%, please help us with the cost of living. However, what I have had is a bag full of constituents write to me about the cost of living and what help there would be in this package, those of which the most vulnerable in our society are the disabled. It seems that given where we're at just now, disabled are having to choose heat over eat, they're losing out in therapies, and the Multiple Sclerosis Society next week will be publishing a report which will show that 40% are going into a real deep crisis this winter, and not a single package has been announced. So can I ask the Chancellor of Exchequer, what package are you going to put forward for the disabled people in our society that we all care for, yet not a single word is in this budget?
We do care for the most vulnerable in our society. That's a duty of government. That's a moral duty of government. And we have announced measures in the energy space, which is helping a whole range of people, which is fundamental to the cost of living in terms of tackling bills this winter.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pound has reached its lowest rate against the dollar in the time that the Chancellor has been on his feet. The FTSE 100 index is down 1.7% simply today. Now, when my honourable friend from York Central raised it to him, he said, well, the markets will react as they will. But if the point of his plan for growth is to increase confidence, and even the City believes stuffing the pockets of the very wealthiest and expecting bankers' bonuses and oil company profits to lead the rest of us to prosperity is a bad idea, who is actually on his side?
The growth plan is about growing the economy. And we're not going to grow the economy by increasing taxes indefinitely.
Mike King.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor mentioned that it would cost £60 billion for his energy package for just 6 months. But the Prime Minister promised that that package would go on until 2024. £240 billion borrowing requirement to fix a broken energy market today, saddled on future generations. Can I ask the Chancellor, does he think that's a price well worth paying?
So I think he's got the mathematics slightly wrong. The business support is 6 months, and the household support is for 2 years. So those are two things that need to be disaggregated. And of course, in terms of long-term pricing, nobody in this room, nobody in the world has any idea what the forward price will be or what the price will be in 2 years. So it would be misleading to put a price on that.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not just the American president, but the dogs in the street know that trickle-down economics doesn't work.
Hear, hear.
What this statement does is push money into the pockets of bankers in the City of London and big fossil fuel companies. It will kill high streets. It will take money away from local economies, and to depend the entire UK economy on one big city while strangling everywhere else is the opposite of levelling up. This document claims on page 32 that the price cap of £2,500 will bring down the average household bill to £2,500. That's still £600 more than it is now, and double what it was in January. So what will the Chancellor do to help people right now, and will he particularly cut VAT on fuel, as Germany has done?
The investment zones and our ability to motivate, incentivise investment is going to help a whole swath of communities across the UK. The reversal of the national insurance tax and the bringing forward of the 1p reduction also will help thousands and thousands, if not millions, of our constituents.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK is already a deregulated, low-tax economy with the most draconian workers' rights in the whole of Europe, in which the richest are well rewarded. It would be bizarre if it wasn't after 12 years of a Tory government. But what that has not led to is the transformation of skills and training across the workforce. It's not led to rising wages, which are still less in real terms than they were before 2010. It has not lifted children out of poverty, and it's left us ranking 150th in the world for the investment that the Tories always talk about it. Can I ask the Chancellor a very specific question? Will he accept this fact? There is no correlation whatsoever between tax burdens and prosperity across high-income countries.
I don't accept his proposition that the level of tax is immaterial. I don't accept that. I don't believe that we can just tax our way to prosperity in the way that the socialists claim. And I absolutely reject the idea that tax doesn't incentivise economic activity.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. After 12 years of Conservative economic failure, the Financial Times reported earlier this week that those on the lowest incomes in the UK are much poorer than their counterparts across the rest of Europe. 20% below Slovenia, for example, while those at the top are among the wealthiest. Now, the Prime Minister has said she doesn't believe in redistribution. The measures announced today suggest he does, but in the wrong direction, taking from those who have least and giving to those who have most. Does he not recognise that the British people will see it exactly for what it is?
What I do recognise is that socialism and high tax doesn't work. And he and others have stood 4 times on a socialist platform. The British people have rejected them 4 times. And if they go back to their socialism, they will be rejected once again.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Today we have heard the promise of accelerating energy infrastructure. Since I have been in this place, every MP in South Wales has been asking and demanding for a tidal lagoon in Swansea Bay. Now, will the Chancellor make that commitment to work with Welsh Government and Swansea Council to make tidal energy, green energy in this country a reality?
So I've done a lot in that regard, actually. We had a ring fence for tidal marine energy, and there is a project in Scotland which is focused on that. The lagoon project she mentions, I looked at and wasn't at the time value for money, but I'm open to the concept.
Patricia Gibson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, these plans mean that in Tory Britain, someone earning £50,000 will pay the same income tax rate as a millionaire. Today's plans mean someone earning £1 million a year will pay £42,500 less income tax every year, and that is shameful. These plans were not in the Tory manifesto. They don't have a mandate, and they certainly don't have a mandate in Scotland. The UK is already the most unequal country in Europe in terms of disposable income, according to the OECD. And after today, that inequality is guaranteed to widen. He may be proud of his announcements today, but what does he say to those who will now conclude that, just like Britain, the Chancellor's moral compass is broken?
I reject that implication. I reject their statement. We're absolutely focused in the Treasury and across government on helping the most vulnerable, and that's why we had the most radical energy intervention that any British government has ever made.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality is this is a class war budget. This is an ideological budget. This is about taking from the poor and giving to the rich. It's about lining the pockets. It is about them and us. And that party over there have said, we do not care about ordinary people in this country. We care about piling on debts. We will make ordinary people pay while our chums in the city get rich. And will those chums spend the money on the economy? No. They will squirrel it away to tax havens around the world. That's what they have always done. Is this budget not a disgrace?
So what I want to reiterate is the fact that reversing the national insurance increase, which Labour supported. 3 months ago, Labour supported or voted against the increase in the national increase. I've reversed this. We've reversed this. That helps people. That helps people. Bringing forward the basic, the 1p cut in the basic rate helps people. That's not class war, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Clive Efforts.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the proportion of income for the wealthiest over the last 12 years has actually gone up. So how come his economic miracle hasn't been working for the last 12 years? And where does his mandate come for this new era? Because it's worth reminding ourselves that 2/3 of the members on the benches opposite didn't vote for a candidate that supports the economic approach that the Chancellor has taken today, and only 43% of Tory members voted against it. So the choice today is clear. Who pays the bill? Is it the taxpayers, or is it these high-earning energy companies who have got excess profits? The choice is clear for the public, So why don't we put it to a general election, because he doesn't have a mandate for what he's doing today.
So the choice is clear as to whether we should back growth driven by the private sector, or we believe that the state can tax its way to prosperity. That's a very easy choice to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's clear that taxing and spending to prosperity is a failure.
Laura Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Putney, Roehampton and Southfields will see right through this budget for how little it will do for them. The only growth this growth plan will deliver is a growth in inequality. Does the Chancellor agree with his department, who, according to reports, have carried out analysis that forecasts that the UK oil and gas producers and electricity generators will receive as much as £170 billion in excess profits over the next 2 years? Shouldn't they pay their fair share?
That figure is not relating to taxable profits here in the UK, and it's not remotely accurate.
Deirdre Brock.
How and when will the Chancellor address the concerns raised by economists at the Resolution Foundation, the Institute for Government and the IFS that this package doesn't meet current fiscal rules?
As I said in my statement, we have a medium-term fiscal plan which will outline the medium-term approach to fiscal discipline in the next few months.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents are terrified at rising bills. That's the word that they use, terror. Energy bills are still going to be double what they were earlier this year. Working class, but it's not a crisis for the Chancellor's class. Already making record profits, this is a banker's budget. It scraps the cap on bonuses, it slashes tax for the top 1% of earners, and cuts tax on the profits of big business. Up and down the country, people are saying enough is enough. On their behalf, can the Chancellor tell me, does he really believe helping bankers and millionaire CEOs who needs the most help, rather than working class people?
Well, two things. The reversal of the national insurance increase puts £330 a year on average to 28 million people, and bringing forward the basic rate, the cut in the basic rate by 1p, actually puts £330 into the average person's pocket. That is not a banker's budget.
Alison McGovern.
Speaker, we've had a lot of words, but my constituents care about the numbers, and they will think that £18 billion is an awful lot of money. So what, Madam Deputy Speaker, are they going to get for it? The Chancellor stated in his statement that that would pay for business investment, job creation, and would raise wages. So I want to know precisely by how much real wages will rise by the end of this forecast period.
We don't run. This is not the Gos plan. This is not the Soviet Union. I can't predict what the average wage will be, but I do know that one way to destroy the economic productivity of this country is to, if she will permit me, is to raise taxes in the way that she's campaigned for over many, many years in her Corbynista days, whatever that she was representing. That is not the way to grow the economy in this country.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Please may I remind the Chancellor that security is the first responsibility of government. And please may I ask the Chancellor how today's changes in corporation tax might serve to reverse the cuts to the army of 10,000 soldiers, which will make the army the smallest that it has been since the Crimean War.
So the corporation tax hasn't been changed, it's just been kept at the level that it is now. So there's no change in that. And in terms of defence spending, he will know that my right honourable friend has committed to a 3% of GDP defence target by 2030, recognising the changing nature of the threats and the real importance of our armed forces.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor this morning promised new laws to speed up the building of major infrastructure projects. So can I take from him that he's actually fully behind the Prime Minister and her promise to build the biggest infrastructure project in my constituency, the Northern Powerhouse Rail, And can I expect to meet with him soon after conference recess to immediately discuss plans to build it in full, including the Bradford stop?
I'll be very happy to meet the honourable gentleman to discuss infrastructure projects. We published a list of things that we want to accelerate, but infrastructure projects clearly are critically important to the growth plan. So I'd be very happy to meet him at a time which is convenient.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just be clear with the House that the 2,500 figure for energy bills is for the typical or average household, and in fact many non-typical and non-average households will continue to pay more, and they will often be people with the greatest needs and in the greatest needs, and they will continue to pay more until there are structural changes to the energy market, including sorting out prepayment between gas and oil prices.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right to say that in terms of the energy market, we do need to look at how it works. It's openly discussed, the fact that the gas price actually determines the electricity price, where actually a lot of our electricity generation is non-fossil fuel based. It's based on renewables, and that's work that I commissioned in Bays that I hope to see completed very soon.
Chris Stevens.
Madam Deputy Speaker, what message does the Chancellor have for working people today who are having to utilise food banks, now considering utilising warm banks, and at Christmas time will have to utilise toy banks, whilst at the same time his government plans to introduce legislation to drag out pay negotiations, which will drag on for months, leading to the stagnation of wages? Isn't the STUC correct when he described his statement as a full frontal assault on working people in Scotland?
It's nothing of the kind. What people will benefit from is a reversal of the national insurance increase, the acceleration, the bringing forward of the 1p cut in the basic rate. That's what millions, tens of millions of people in this country will benefit from.
Sarah Jones.
Deputy Speaker, a young adult asked me yesterday whether I really believe that things in our country could get better, which is in the direct opposite of my young adulthood, where it didn't occur to us that things would get worse. What is it about 12 years of Conservative government that have caused such poverty of hope? And what is it about this tired set of ideas that have sent the markets crashing that is going to work when all the other ones have failed?
We're focused on growth, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's through growth that the young person that she spoke to is going to get more opportunities and more benefits and actually have a much better funded public sector.
Richard Berger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tax cuts for the richest, bigger bonuses for bankers. This is the classic trickle-down con trick. The wealth won't trickle down. In fact, it will be sucked up into fewer and fewer hands. So won't the Chancellor admit that that is what this is designed to do? That the Tories are acting like Robin Hood in reverse, taking from the poor and giving to the rich? And isn't that appalling at this time when people across the country, people out there, are really suffering during this cost of living emergency?
So there are three big measures which are helping people up and down, millions, tens of millions. Firstly, the energy intervention announced by my right honourable friend last week, the reversal of the national insurance planned increase, and of course the acceleration, the bringing forward of the 1p cuts in the basic rate. He should be welcoming those measures and not playing to the gallery with his tired old socialist rhetoric.
Lyra Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Access to dentists has reached a catastrophic low. 1 in 5 people are resorting to DIY dentistry, with shocking stories from many of my Bath constituents. The only way to get a dentist appointment now is going private, which costs far more than any tax cuts will offset. How will the tax cuts today offer my Bath constituents proper access to the dental care they need?
Well, what the growth plan will do is mean that as we grow our economy, we can get more tax revenue to pay for vital public services. That's a key part and a key rationale of the plan.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Chancellor on his appointment.
Family-owned Eccles Ice Cream in my constituency has been struggling with soaring energy bills. This century-old company will miss out on the government's support because their energy contract was renewed one day before the arbitrary cut-off following the collapse of their supplier. Can I ask the Chancellor and his colleagues to review this cut-off date to support small businesses?
Obviously, I'd have to look at the specifics of the case, and I've just heard it today, but if she corresponds with my department, we can, I'm sure, get back with a timely answer to that question.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is not a growth plan for the constituents in my Liverpool Riverside constituency or the 4 million children living in poverty. The No Child Left Behind campaign is calling urgently on this government to tackle child poverty. So can the Chancellor commit to finding funding to roll out free universal school meals immediately and tackle childhood poverty?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
This is not a spending statement, but of course we take child poverty, the vulnerable, extremely seriously, and that's why that was the basis of the energy intervention.
Ruth Cadbury.
Madam Deputy Speaker, firstly, could I thank the Chancellor for overturning his Business Secretary's statement yesterday on onshore wind by removing the ridiculous planning restrictions that are unique to that sector. Talk about a one-day cabinet flip-flop. But secondly, can I warn him against removing normal planning rules on development and investment zones? When the Tory government removed the need for offices to housing planning rules, those conversions led to housing which were tiny rabbit hutches, no natural light, no basic services, and often away, when they're on industrial estates, away from basic things like footpaths, bus stops, schools and parks. Is this a dodgy developer's charter too?
Not at all. The whole purpose, the whole principle behind the investment zone is a mutual consent. No investment zones will be imposed in any areas, and it'll be very much up to local councils to work out which are appropriate sites for the investment zones. It's a cooperative exercise which will not be the developer's charter that she describes.
Christian Wakefield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We were promised a big bang by the Chancellor. Instead, we've barely got snap, crackle and pop. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've got tax breaks for rich, whilst he tells the next generation to pay off a debt that he is piling up. Truly, the Chancellor of sound money. The Resolution Foundation said that the poorest 10% of households will gain all of £11 from this budget. That isn't a budget, of course. He is also raising the cap on bankers' bonuses while threatening to cut benefits for 120,000 people on universal credit. Why is he not looking out for those who are struggling the most and instead acting as the Chancellor for fracking donors and bankers?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, it's nice to see him in his place on the other side. In splendid isolation there. But I would remind him that the measures relating to national insurance and the basic rate do actually help a vast number of constituents on both sides of the House.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder, what does it say about the government that at the height of a cost of living crisis we appear to have a Chancellor who's putting pressure on the Governor of the Bank of England to increase interest rates, presumably on the basis that he considers that there's too many people right now who've got too much money in their pockets? And what also does it say about the priorities of the government, I wonder? Of all the groups that the government has rushed furthest to help, it's bankers suffering the indignity and privations of only being able to qualify for bonuses double their salary. We have an economic historian for a Chancellor. Isn't the legacy of today's statement going to be that for tens of millions of households of the length and breadth of the UK, he's going to make any notion of a fair economy history?
Any cursory look at the history of this country shows that the way to deal with debt, the way to deal with cost of living issues is to grow the economy. And that's why we're 100% focused on that.
Beth Winter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the TUC has pointed out, the Chancellor has said that we've been far too focused on redistribution and not on growth. But here he's been this morning making announcement after announcement that redistributes to the wealthy, lining the pockets of the bankers and the fossil fuel companies. people in my constituency of the Cynon Valley, indeed millions of people up and down the country in receipt of public pay, in receipt of social security benefits and pensions, have never benefited from any form of redistribution under this Tory government. All they've experienced is pay freeze, benefits cap and a freeze on the triple lock. Isn't it the case, as the overwhelming evidence does show, that the only thing that is growing is people's debt, people's energy bills, and sorry?
Keep going.
Order! I think the Honourable Lady's probably got the message that she's taking too long, but I can't blame only the Honourable Lady because lots of people have taken too long. I've been quite lenient because we've got plenty of time today, but, you know, there's still a question of courtesy to the House. I hope the Honourable Lady will just put her question now, please.
Absolutely nothing for the majority of people in the neoliberal economic...
Order! When I politely asked the Honourable Lady to just put her question, can't she just put her question? Has she put it? Because I didn't hear it.
It wasn't clear what the question was, but if she's suggesting that we haven't helped people with this growth plan, I would just gently remind her that the energy intervention helps nearly everybody. The reversal of the national insurance increase helps 28 million people and gives them £330 a year, and accelerating the cut, the 1p cut in the basic rate, also gives £300 a year to the average worker. These are substantial benefits, which I'm sure her constituents will appreciate.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think today's statement has shown that the Conservative government is out of touch with rural Britain. The Rural Services Network have said that people in rural areas face significantly higher costs, partly due to being reliant on private transport and partly, as we discussed in the House, on off-grid heating, and that they earn much less than their urban counterparts. So can the Chancellor explain to me how today's budget will help people living in rural areas?
I think she does well to raise this issue, because clearly people affected who benefit from a limit to the price of electricity don't cover people in rural areas who are off the grid, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has announced some measure of support, and we're also looking at other ways that we can help people in the way that she's described.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very proud of the fact that Glenrothes was the first town in any of our 4 nations to be recognised by the Living Wage Foundation for its progress towards becoming a living wage town. That's a proper living wage, not the Chancellor's pretended kiddie-on one. The Living Wage Foundation have recently confirmed that the proper living wage needs to increase by over 10% just for people to stand still. Now, I know that Fife Council, other public bodies and the many private businesses that act as their suppliers are very keen to continue to pay that fair living wage to all of their workers. So will the Chancellor confirm today that the public spending budget, will guarantee adequate funding so that responsible public sector employers can continue to pay a fair wage to essential workers, or does he expect key workers to survive on rounds of applause for another 12 months?
Yeah. Chancellor,
we've made lots of progress in terms of the fair wage. Also, I might add that the national minimum wage is something that we've increased, and we've always sought to protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Kirsty Blackman.
The Chancellor seems to believe that there are 2 fundamentally different groups of people in these islands, 2 classes, if you will. Why does he believe that those earning megabucks will be incentivised by increasing their already excessive wealth, while those who've had to skip meals during the course of the summer in order to survive will be incentivised by having that paltry amount reduced even further?
It's a complete misrepresentation or willful misunderstanding of our position. What we've done in the growth plan is protect millions and millions of vulnerable people. We've allowed them to keep more of their own money. I know she's not necessarily in favour of that. And we want to drive growth and entrepreneurialism in our economy.
And finally, the prize for perseverance and patience goes to Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have a budget for the 1% by a grim, bankrupted Thatcherite Tribute Act. 1 in 3 in my great city are in food poverty now. I have constituents unable to put the heating on, take a hot shower, put a meal on the table. At the current levels, which was mentioned before, will double from January. This does absolutely nothing for them. So will the Chancellor actually focus on the people who are facing this humanitarian disaster across all our communities, instead of playing to the rich bankers who bankroll his party? And will he sit down and meet with me and discuss how a right to food could right some of these wrongs in society?
Excellent. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I'm always, as a minister, I've always been open to colleagues on both sides of the houses. People have spoken to me. I sometimes, regrettably, have some of my conversations leaked to the press, but I'd be happy to speak to him on an issue of concern to his constituents.
Thank you. In a moment, I will call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the provisional collection of taxes motion. Copies of the motion are available in the vote office. In accordance with Standing Order number 51.2 on Ways and Means motions, a Minister of the Crown may, without notice, make a motion for giving provisional statutory effect to any proposals in pursuance of Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968. And the question on such a motion shall be put forthwith. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the provisional collection of taxes motion formally.
Move formally.
The question is the motion on stamp duty land tax reduction as set out in the provisional collection of taxes motion. As mayors of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you. That concludes proceedings on the Chancellor's statement. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
I now call Kate Kniveton with her petition.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to present a petition recognising Burton's brewing industry is of national cultural importance, and that the recent decision of Molson Coors to move their head offices to the National Brewery Centre puts Burton's heritage items at risk. This issue has rightly gathered national attention, with recent online campaigning gaining thousands of supporters and national news coverage highlighting the importance of our brewing heritage. Whilst I'm grateful for Molson Coors' ongoing commitment to Burton,